Welcome again to When Dropouts Return to School, one in a series of webinars on K-12 early warning systems brought to you by the National REL program. I'm a senior research associate on the REL West team at WestEd, and part of my work is as a member of the Dropout Prevention Alliance in Utah and the School Climate Alliance, which is how I became acquainted with our practitioner expert from Nevada, who will be presenting later this morning. Our other key presenter is a researcher I work with at WestEd, Vanessa Barrat. Here's what we're hoping you will get out of our discussion today. You'll have an opportunity to discuss what is known about students who have dropped out of school and subsequently re-enrolled, including data on risk factors and outcomes. You'll understand more about the experiences of students who drop out and re-enroll, and you'll also learn about promising practices for supporting re-enrollees, including use of data and early warning systems. Now we're going to turn to a researcher with a lot of experience in the area of at-risk children. She'll share some data on the extent of the dropout issue and some original research about students who drop out of school. Vanessa Barrat is a colleague of mine at REL West at WestEd, and she's joining us from New York. She performs quantitative research to improve the practice and policy of education. Her research has been disseminated nationwide to education stakeholders, including a REL West study titled Re-enrollment of High School Dropouts in a Large Urban School District, which found that dropping out is not necessarily a permanent outcome. Vanessa, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you now to talk about the re-enrollee experience.
So, thank you, Noelle. I would like to first step up from the problem we're facing. There is an estimating 2.5 million young adults aged 16 to 24 who were not in 2014 enrolled in school or had not received a high school diploma. That's an estimate of a status dropout. And the long-term negative effects of not having a high school diploma on a person's career, earnings, social situation, health, and even likelihood of incarceration are well studied. Dropout prevention has definitively been gaining momentum, and graduation rates have regularly been increasing in the past years. This is now a clear understanding that high school graduation is crucial to our nation's economic, political, and civic life. However, very little is still known about students who drop out and return to high school. The focus has been more on dropout prevention than on student re-engagement. And until recently, dropout recovery has not been as prevalent in research as dropout prevention. But there is an understanding, however, that solving the dropout challenge includes supporting those students who give themselves a second chance at graduating from high school. So our goal today is actually to present you some work that we did on re-enrollees, and basing ourselves on 2 studies, one district level, one statewide, we'd like to present some estimates about the number of dropouts we found, their education outcomes, and also based on interviews we did in the field with district representatives, principals, and re-enrollees themselves. Say a little bit about the reasons for dropping out and re-enrolling, and also challenges districts have faced when dropouts return to school. So for those 2 studies, we have followed cohorts of students. The first study was district-wide, and we followed all students who first entered 9th grade in 2001, and we followed them over 5 years, tracking all of their enrollment histories. That represented a cohort of approximately 4,000 students. In Utah, we were able to follow the enrollment histories of the statewide cohort of students expected to graduate from Utah high schools in 2011. We actually followed them for 4 years, extending then the period of analysis to 6 years, so up to 2013, to catch up a little bit what happened 2 years beyond the expected date of graduation. And that represented a cohort of approximately 40,000 students. So, magnitude of re-enrollment of dropouts. This slide is about San Bernardino in California. Following our students for 5 years, we found out that 35% had a dropout event. Other students did not drop out. They either went straight to graduation or were still enrolled in school after 5 years or transferred to another district with transcript. However, a little bit more than 1/3 had a dropout event. Looking at their enrollment trajectory, we found out that out of those dropout students, 31% re-enrolled into the district schools, while 69% were permanent dropouts and did not come back into the district. Working statewide in Utah, I want to mention that we found similar results, with about 1 in 5 students dropping out. And again, out of those dropouts, about 1 in 5 dropouts coming back to the public high schools. So we looked at those re-enrollment rates by different student characteristics, and we're able to observe quite some variations, actually. So this is, again, about San Bernardino in California, with an average re-enrollment rate of about 31%. You can see here quite some variation based on the student characteristics from that 31%. The most important was that both in the district and actually in Utah in the state studies, we were able to observe the same thing. It was students who dropped out early in high school who re-enrolled at the highest rate. You see here that in San Bernardino, nearly half of those students who dropped out right away in 9th grade re-enrolled, while only 2% of those who dropped out in 12th grade re-enrolled. And the conjunction of dropout rates and re-enrollment rates helped us define different profiles that completed the characterization of students at high risk of dropping out. For example, among those groups of students who have higher dropout rates, Hispanic English learners, that's what ELL stands for, and male students had all high dropout rates, but they were less likely to re-enroll, resulting in higher rates of permanent exits. In contrast, 9th grade and Black students were more likely to re-enroll after dropping out, resulting in higher rates of temporary enrollment interruptions. In Utah, we found some comparable results, especially for English learners and male students with high dropout rates and low re-enrollment rates, so more likely to be permanent dropouts. We were also able to look in Utah at re-enrollment rates by disability status, knowing that students with disabilities dropped out at higher rates. And we found that those students were, in contrast, more likely to experience temporary interruptions with higher re-enrollment rates than average. So looking at the academic outcomes of students, we tracked the credit accumulation of students throughout those 5 years in San Bernardino. And so the horizontal line that you see is the credit accumulation of a student who's on track and who transferred from 9th to 10th and has the required credit accumulation. Two main findings from that slide is that before dropping out, both re-enrollees here in dark green and permanent dropouts were not on track to graduate. And also that before dropping out, re-enrollees had earned on average more course credit than permanent dropouts, suggesting it was students who were better off to start with who will eventually come back. So this slide really focuses on students who dropped out and re-enroll. And we have in dark green the number of credits in average accumulated before dropping out, and in light green the number of credits accumulated after re-enrolling. And you can see here the horizontal line, 230 credits was the number of credits required for graduation. Most re-enrollees did not earn enough credits to graduate. Only those 12 graders with a lot of credits accumulated in average got in average enough credits to graduate, and I want to temper that by the fact that not many dropped out in 12th grade in San Bernardino, and if you remember, those were the lowest percentage of re-enrollment. We found a similar result in our statewide study in Utah, dropouts being definitively credit deficient, and few re-enrollees making it to graduation and accumulating enough credits. However, some did. And in San Bernardino, while over half of the re-enrollees dropped out again after re-enrolling, nearly 1 in 5 graduated from high school within 5 years of starting it. And dropping out was not necessarily a permanent outcome for those students. In the Utah statewide study, the percentage of re-enrollees who ended up graduating in 4 years was about 1 in 4 re-enrollees, so even higher. And following it, so the students extending the time frame 2 years beyond those traditional 4 years actually increased the graduation rate of re-enrollees by several percentage points. So to summarize that overlook of the findings of our studies, we've learned that dropping out was not a final outcome. Over 30% of dropouts actually re-enrolled into the district schools. Unfortunately, over half of those students who came back dropped out again. And most re-enrollees did not graduate, but some did. 1/5 to 1/4 of re-enrollees graduated with a regular high school diploma.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. The data you present are really fascinating because they uncover an aspect of lives of dropouts that most of us, I think, don't think about.
Our San Bernardino study didn't end there, actually. We completed interviews with district administrators, high school principals, and dropouts currently re-enrolled to capture, first, the student voices on why they dropped out and re-enrolled. And second, school and district leaders' voices on practices to re-enroll students and challenges to re-enrollment. So the interviews with students first inquired about the reasons for dropping out. And before describing the answers from our students, let me precise that it is acknowledged in the dropout literature that actually reasons students drop out of high school tend to be very complex, and that dropout is less a singular event and more a gradual process of disengagement from school that goes over several years of academic and or behavioral difficulties. This being said, the dropout literature documents often factors to dropping out of school and separating those factors into factors that push students out of schools before graduating and life circumstances that pull them in directions that stall completions. And that's how we have organized the findings from the students' interviews here. In terms of factors that pushed students out of school, re-enrollees in San Bernardino reported academic struggles and the need for more help to master grade level. They got bored and discouraged, finding limited ways to make up failed courses and credits with credit deficiency accumulating. They believed that meeting course requirements to graduate was out of their reach. In terms of factors that pulled them out of school, actually half mentioned that parents and other relatives were not high school graduates and they felt there was low expectations actually to graduate from high school. Labor market and earning a salary seemed to be more important. Some family crises were also mentioned by our students, going from homelessness, drug use, the need to have a job outside of schools, and gang pressure and violence in the community. All of those were personal challenges that pulled them away from school. Moving on to what we really wanted to know, because we had never been there before, we inquired about the push and pull factors that influenced their decisions to returning to school. And among factors that pushed students back to school, The primary reason, according to all interviewed re-enrollees, was their failure to secure employment. Students also mentioned wanting a better future because they realized that a high school diploma actually was the minimum credential for many jobs. They hanged around with other dropouts whose lives they described as, quote, then ended, and decided to come back to school. Also, for those students who were involved in the juvenile justice or child welfare system, regular attendance was mentioned as a mandated probation provision to receive public assistance. In terms of factors that pull students back to school, all of our students, all re-enrollees interviewed, acknowledged the influence of persistent school staff. Some mentioned principals, teachers, sport coaches, counselors, that had an impact in pulling dropouts back to high school, and by offering to immediately re-enroll them. They mentioned re-enrolling as very easy, and the promise of counseling and academic assistance if they returned. So school and district leaders' voices, I want to mention after presenting those pullback-in factors in San Bernardino that the district was absolutely dedicated to re-enroll dropouts and proceeded to do so with a mix of daily attendance verification, home visit, attendance blitzes, and sending staff out to where kids meet to propose them to re-enroll them in school, including malls and other areas where kids were gathering. But despite the more imperative to re-enroll students, school and district leaders mentioned challenges and even disincentives for schools and districts to do so. And I'd like to go over four main disincentives or issues that were mentioned by our interviewees. First, the lack of readily available credit recovery interventions. In traditional high school especially, there were 5 traditional high school and 2 continuation high school in San Bernardino. And upon re-enrolling, it was hard to really support students in traditional high school into catching up lost time and credits. Knowing that all re-enrollees, as we have seen, have explained that credit deficiency was really the main problem for staying in school. The 2 continuation high school in the district offered credit recovery interventions, but had insufficient capacity to meet demand, and here you had sometimes to wait to re-enroll. Funding was definitively mentioned, and the district leaders and school principal expressed concern how the district's average daily attendance is affected by dropouts, re-enrollees, and actually other transitory students. ADA is California's base district per pupil funding formula, and it decreases with declining enrollments and irregular attendance. And finally, accountability. Again, district leaders and principals reported challenging meeting specific accountability provisions, since the outcomes of many re-enrollees were of poor attendance and additional dropouts, and were especially mentioned as added challenge the participation rate to statewide testing and graduation rates. So what were the policy recommendations that we heard from the field? Well, they're quite in line with the challenges that were mentioned before. More capacity for districts to offer enrollment spots at continuation schools, and having credit recovery options available at traditional high schools too, to allow students upon re-enrolling to be on fast track to recover credits missed. Funding was definitively mentioned, and other program incentives as a counterbalance to these incentives that districts and schools experienced when providing outreach to dropouts and re-enrolling those admittedly high-risk and high-need students. finally, the need to develop outreach, re-enrollment, attendance, academic, and other counseling interventions to meet the needs of re-enrollees and their families throughout the school years. Those were their suggestions. We just added one, which is that in link with the early warning system, too often past dropout events and gaps in enrollment are not included in the early warning system and other data systems used to evaluate student needs. And based on what we see in terms of credit deficiency and added support needed by students who may have missed several months of schools, this seems particularly important. So we've seen data from our district-wide study on re-enrollees and hints of what the statewide study also included in terms of findings. I want to mention in conclusion that Education Week dedicated its 2013 edition of Diploma Count to what they called second chances, that is, turning dropouts into graduate. The focus of that series of articles is to investigate recovery interventions and re-engagement programs throughout the countries, and really puts the bright light focus on how to make that re-enrollment successful. Our point today was that some re-enrollees do succeed to graduate, but it's nearly not enough, and there is a need of really focused intervention, which I think we're going to hear about later on to provide support to those students who give themselves a second chance.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing this very, very useful and interesting information with us. When these students drop out, do we know whether or not they might re-enroll in different districts?
So yes, actually, if students drop, yes and no, actually. If students drop out and re-enroll in a different district, there should be a transfer of credits, right? And there should be some hints given to the districts of origin that a student is moving on to a different district. So if the district has received such a request, knows that the student has now re-enrolled in a different district and has received a request for transferring credits, the student is actually, he had dropped out from the district if there was a period of missing enrollment. But if it goes straight to another district, it's actually not considered a dropout. He's considered a transfer. And for the statewide studies, definitively so, because in that case, we looked across enrollment across the whole state. So transferring to another district would be a re-enrollment, just like any other one.
Great. Okay, just one or two more quick questions. One of our participants wants to know how long it takes for a student to be labeled a dropout. How much school do they have to miss before we come to the conclusion that they've dropped out?
Well, at the time, you were labeled a dropout if it was, there are two separate questions. At one point, do you start investigating to where the student is? And upon what you're finding, what makes the student a dropout? A student would be called a dropout if he's confirmed not to be enrolled in another institution that delivers a diploma, or he just disappeared and nobody knows where he is, or he has formally withdrawn. Now, in San Bernardino, and I think in Utah, 10 days of consecutive absence launched the whole process, specifically in San Bernardino, of even home visits to the house and trying to find out where is the student.
Thank you. And there's one more question, and that is, why San Bernardino? Why did you choose them to do your study?
Well, actually, at the time, I think the superintendent chose us. There was deep concerns about, at the time, so that study was made a few years ago, and nobody was really speaking about re-enrollees at the time, and the San Bernardino superintendent came and said, that's not what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing students disappearing from my high school. I see them, and I think he employed the term a revolving door. I see them dropping out and then re-enrolling and then dropping out again and then re-enrolling. And what I see about dropout prevention or those dropout rates that I see in the press and everywhere does not represent what I see in my district. And so upon consultation with WestEd, that's how we launched in that first district study. We were very excited to actually follow up that first effort with a statewide study in Utah and see if we would find the same extent of temporary leaving and going back to school.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I think those are all the questions we have time for. You're going to hear from Jennifer Harris, and she is a real champion of student voice, and she's led many efforts to get student voice to be a district-wide focus in her district and getting staff to partner with students in their decision-making process. And her formal title is Program Evaluator for the Washoe County School District in Reno, and she has a lot of other responsibilities, but the work she does with students is just outstanding, and we're really happy that she's here to join us today. Jennifer, please share your wisdom.
Wow, thank you, Noelle, for that introduction. I would like to start by telling you a bit about my school district to provide some context. The Washoe County School District is a large urban district in Nevada that serves the metro Reno Sparks areas and also includes several nearby high desert communities. Our district employees are very committed to knowing each of our 64,000 students and supporting their success in school. In fact, our motto is, every child by name and face to graduation. Our graduation rates are on the rise, but I want to focus on the other percentages listed. In 2010, 21% of our graduating cohort were dropped out and did not graduate. Losing this percentage of students, which equates to over 1,000 students, is alarming, and our district has taken an intentional approach to prevention, intervention, and re-engagement to ensure students stay engaged in our educational system and successfully reach their academic goals. Our approach is having an impact. Among the 2015 graduating cohort, 11% dropped out and did not graduate. Although we still have many hurdles to overcome, we are encouraged that more of our students are staying through to graduation. Our approach occurs within a multi-tiered system of supports framework, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. As you know, MTSS involves 3 levels or tiers of support. Tier 1 is the least intensive and generally involves elements of good practice, like high quality and engaging instruction, school-wide substance abuse prevention efforts, and after-school programs. These universal interventions are used to support the behavioral and academic engagement of all of our students. Here at the Washoe County School District, we also utilize school-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports, or PBIS, to nurture healthy and safe school climates. Our district has also partnered with the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning to build the capacity of school staff to really foster the development of those SEL competencies among our students. At Tiers 2 and 3, however, interventions are more individualized. School teams, known as intervention assistance teams, meet to review student data to identify barriers to learning and formulate the best approaches to helping students overcome these barriers. After an intervention is identified and applied, the IAT monitors implementation of the intervention and reviews its outcomes. The team then determines how to best continue supporting each student. Interventions at Tiers 2 and 3 intentionally address some of the push-out factors that Vanessa mentioned earlier within the San Bernardino study. So, for example, credit recovery options, intercession opportunities, and alternative learning environments allow students who struggle academically to earn credit at an accelerated pace so that they can see that graduation is within their reach. Interventions at these tier levels also utilize pull-in factors as part of the intervention. For example, my district uses check-in, check-out, and check-and connect. Both of these interventions involve connecting students with someone in the school building who can build long-term and trusting relationships with them. The interventions I described are used within schools for supporting enrolled students. But for students who have dropped out, we needed to create an approach that would allow us to not just re-enroll students, but also ensure their continued engagement after re-enrollment. Re-engagement, a Tier 3 intervention, refers to the process of outreach to, re-enrollment of, and continued long-term support for students who have dropped out or who are not enrolled in an academic setting. Our district has been very active in developing an approach to re-engagement, and I'm going to spend the rest of my time describing this approach with an emphasis on the way we use information to support the re-engagement process. In 2010, we were awarded the High School Graduation Initiative federal grant to build a re-engagement program to locate and re-enroll dropped-out youth. Re-engagement staff attempt to reach students immediately prior to or after dropout has occurred. The primary focus of our re-engagement efforts is on students in grades 6 through 12, and last year our re-engagement staff actively case managed 329 students and reached out to another 526 students. Re-engagement operates within our intervention department, which also houses truancy, children in transition, which is a program that serves our homeless students, and our family resource centers. Each of these programs serves many of the same students. A larger percentage of our homeless students and students with attendance challenges drop out of school, and so it is critical that these departments work in tandem. Re-engagement specialists, and I can't stress this enough, are the heartbeat of our re-engagement program. We currently have 5 full-time specialists. These specialists are required to have a solid understanding of case management principles. I would also say that the most important attributes of these specialists is their patience, their understanding, and their strong desire to support students. I would say that they are persistent themselves, and they truly believe that every student has the ability to succeed. Re-engagement specialists make initial contact with students by going to their homes, calling students, and meeting students where it is most comfortable to the student. Family members sometimes join the initial visit, and it is common for parents and siblings to also access school resources as a result of this meeting. Specialists talk with students about educational options and connect them with a school counselor. If students agree, they are immediately enrolled in a school at the time of the initial visit through an online portal. A follow-up meeting is scheduled for an in-depth conversation where they can begin to identify specific needs and connect students and their families with school and community resources. The goal is to stabilize students by meeting the most immediate needs so that students can be successful in their learning when they return to school. Re-engagement does not stop once students re-enroll in school. Specialists work closely with school counselors and school intervention assistance teams to share information about students, to coordinate school and community services, and to be a guiding voice to students, their families, and school staff. The level of case management decreases after students are stabilized, but specialists continue to check in with students to make sure any emerging needs are addressed. The ongoing connection to students is key. We have found that students are more likely to be enrolled at the end of the year. Sometimes this is referred to as the stick rate, when students have someone to advocate for them within the school. And so our re-engagement approach has evolved to include long-term case management and advocacy. Re-engagement staff also provide case management to students who are chronically absent and have been required to meet with the Student Attendance Review Board. The board supports students who have attendance challenges to prevent dropout and also to decrease involvement with the juvenile justice system. In Nevada, students are required by statute to maintain at least a 90% average daily attendance, or they lose course credits for that semester. School staff can refer students who are close to dropping below that 90% average daily attendance to the Student Attendance Review Board. And this typically occurs after 3 confirmed truancies. Information or data really is essential to the re-engagement process. Students are first identified for outreach by specific withdrawal codes in our student information system. Re-engagement specialists run lists each week for new withdrawals and check on the enrollment status of students who were on their caseloads in previous years. Queries for these reports are built within our student information system so they are easily run. Other sources of information used in the re-engagement process include case notes, student goals, an early warning system, and a student profile report. Case notes and the goals that students set for themselves are shared by re-engagement staff with school teams or counselors, often in person. This information is extremely sensitive and it is not housed in the student information system. I'm going to go into a little more detail about the early warning system and student profile in the next 2 slides. Our Office of Accountability created an early warning system or risk index that contains elements associated with academic disengagement. Each element can be looked at separately to help identify specific areas where a student may be struggling. Since the early warning system is predictive of dropout, most re-engaged students fall into the high-risk category. The greatest value of the early warning system for these students is its use in the problem-solving process, such as within conversations with students to identify specific areas where support is needed. For example, students may have been retained at least once in their school career or have not earned all of the expected credits in 9th grade, which suggests academic struggle. Other components of the risk index include homeless status, attendance, and GPA. School teams, IATs, and re-engagement specialists also utilize a student profile report to learn more about students, particularly about their academic progress. The student profile report lists students' special population status, such as English proficiency, if a student receives special education services, and if they have received Tier 2 or 3 interventions for academic or behavioral needs in the last 2 years. The report also lists most recent standardized assessment results, course grades, attendance, total credits earned, GPA, and their risk status. This report is automated and is available to staff for students whom they directly support. There are some challenges to re-engagement. We initially faced reluctance by school administrators to re-enroll dropouts. Accountability created a disincentive to enroll these students who often are severely behind in credits and are not likely to graduate with their class. But more than accountability, many administrators felt and still feel that re-engaged students could be better served by an alternative placement option. The belief is that alternative schools are better equipped to meet the unique and diverse needs of re-engaged students. At the Washoe County School District, we have limited alternative placement options, so schools must meet the challenge of supporting returning students. Another challenge is interdepartment communication, particularly in instances when students are referred for services, but it is not communicated back to the department whether services were actually accessed. This can sometimes make it difficult to know what next steps should be. We are learning more about the fourth challenge listed, which is the lack of knowledge among teachers about the dropout histories of their students. In a focus group I recently held, teachers shared that they are often aware of their students' prior dropout status or of their life situations that place them at a higher risk for disengagement. When they do receive this information, it usually comes from the school counselor through a brief email or a chance encounter in the hallway just to give the teachers a heads up. It also comes from the students themselves if there is a strong enough relationship between them for the student to confide in the teacher. The last challenge I would like to mention is the inconsistent use of our early warning system and student data profile reports. When I asked the teachers in the focus group if the non-academic details in these reports are beneficial to their ability to support students, they all said yes, but then they followed by saying they typically do not seek out that information until after a student has started to disengage or act out, which at that point may be too late to prevent dropout. I suspect that most of us on this call know that the real work that keeps students connected to school is relationship building, but educators have to know who their students are first for those relationships to grow. Information can support this, and so we look for ways to overcome the barriers I just described. To meet some of these challenges, we are working to unify our data systems for re-engagement, truancy, children in transition, and family resources. A single system will limit the duplication of services, ensure receipt of services when referrals are made, and allow these programs to work more cohesively. We are also piloting DESA this year, which stands for the Devereaux Student Strengths Assessment. DESA is an assessment teachers can use to measure students' social and emotional learning competencies in the classroom. Currently, we have school-wide measures of SEL competencies, and we hope the DESA will help staff better support the growth of these competencies among individual students. And finally, we are exploring the types of information that teachers currently use to support students who come to their classrooms after having been dropped out. We are also exploring additional information that would be valuable to them in supporting these students, and we're looking at the possible risks and benefits of sharing sensitive information more broadly with school staff. We want to ensure the information we provide to our educators is actually used to support students, and we are going to investigate best practices within our own district and nationally. I would like to end by saying that I believe these re-engagement efforts demonstrate the commitment of the Washoe County School District to meeting its responsibility of providing an education to all students, including students for a variety of reasons and circumstances have not thrived within the educational system. We know the importance of information to this work, and we continue to strive to improve the information we provide to our educators.
Somebody asked if there's a greater percentage of students with disabilities in the dropout population versus the continuing on-track general education population. So maybe if you know that, dropout versus re-enrollees versus on-track students. Do you have that data about Washoe?
I do. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but definitely our disabled population is overrepresented among our students who drop out. They do not seem to be over or underrepresented amongst the people that we are able to re-engage. But again, I don't have those percentages in front of me.
And we know that Jennifer and Vanessa talked about the use of data to identify these at-risk kids both before they drop out, so to provide interventions as soon as possible, but then also to use that data to find the kids, bring them back, and then monitor their needs and their supports. And we all use data to do this, to support our kids. We also use data for accountability and making all sorts of decisions. But the term early warning systems is specific, and a lot of you on this webinar filled out your registration form and said that you lead early warning systems in your districts and states, but a number of you said that you were not familiar with early warning systems. I just want to give you a quick overview that early warning systems are meant to help better identify kids at risk sooner for the appropriate interventions and then continue to monitor their progress. And that may sound really obvious to all of you experts on the line, but what oftentimes distinguishes an early warning system is that the data that schools use called early warning indicators to identify these kids can be something that works sooner and maybe more specifically than what often we find, which is referrals from counselors and teachers and parents in a little bit more of a slapdash manner. So based on national research or locally validated indicators like Washoe has done, you might be able to catch these kids a little bit sooner than you may otherwise. And then as you catch them, it does not tell you what to do. So you have to dig in a little deeper to figure out how to support these kids